Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
It's getting ready to turn in, as they say, and my phone and my email and everything started blowing up, and I knew, hey, something happened. And perhaps in the biggest response to any news event in my audience, people were letting me know that the story out of Colorado involving the truck driver just had a major event happen in it. That is the story. So I'll read off a lengthy list of people at the end because it seems a fitting thing to do. But the Colorado governor has reduced the truck driver's sentence from 110 years to 10 years. This, of course, is about the accident and the crash that took place on I-70. Elise Schmelzer wrote this version for the Denver Post, widely reported. Colorado governor on Thursday reduced the sentence from 110 years to 10 years for the former truck driver convicted of causing a fatal crash in 2019 that killed 4 people and injured others. He called the sentence imposed on the truck driver highly atypical and unjust in his Thursday letter, announcing the commutation. So the truck driver, who's now 26, will be eligible for parole in about 5 years, but the sentence is actually 10. In the letter, the governor wrote, "You were sentenced to 110 years in prison, effectively more than a life sentence, for a tragic but unintentional act. While you are not blameless, your sentence is disproportionate compared with many other inmates in our criminal justice system who committed intentional, premeditated, or violent crimes." So what we're talking about here, of course, is a clemency situation where the governor of a state can reduce or eliminate sentences given to people in that state for state law violations. So here he's reduced the sentence from 110 years to 10 years. The decision comes after the 110-year sentence imposed 2 weeks ago drew nationwide outrage, and more than 5 million people signed a petition calling on the governor to do something. There were also boycotts of truckers who were stopping at the Colorado border, refusing to come into Colorado for a little while. And interestingly, the reaction most people have to this is that, yeah, the 110 years is too much. But what's strange is the range of reactions that I got, both in comments under my videos and also in emails and messages and so on, where I actually had some people say the guy shouldn't have even gotten a traffic ticket. Like they shouldn't have even given him a ticket because it wasn't his fault. His brakes failed. But I've got a lot of truckers in my audience, and a lot of them chimed in. And most of them likewise said that the 110 years is too much. But, they said, he does deserve to spend time in jail because of the fact that what led to this crash were things that he could have avoided. And so if you're driving your vehicle and you cause the death of 4 people, you got to look at what happened and go, was this avoidable? And if it was, then time in prison is appropriate, just maybe not 110 years. So the decision comes after the sentence imposed 2 weeks ago drew the national outcry, which prompted the district attorney that actually prosecuted the case, requesting the judge reconsider the sentence. Now, the judge granted the request and set a hearing for January 13th, although that probably now is pointless. And so the prosecutor's office is going to make a point here and say, look, it's one thing to say that 110 is too much, let's give him 10. Maybe there should have been a hearing first. The prosecution is asking for a hearing. A representative from the governor's office called the defendants and one of his attorneys on Thursday afternoon and spoke to the attorney. The governor never would have intervened had millions of people not voiced their outrage, his attorney said, but justice was done. So the attorney for the truck driver is now saying 10 years does make sense, at least as far as they're concerned. And again, for those of you who just joined us, the truck driver lost his brakes while traveling into Denver on I-70 back in April of 2019. There was a runaway truck ramp that he drove past but did not utilize, and his speeding semi rammed into stopped traffic under an overpass in Lakewood and resulted in a 28-car pileup. 6 people were injured in the crash and 4 people died. And you may notice in a lot of the stories I don't use names because in my opinion, a lot of the names are irrelevant. You hear them and it's like, you forget about them because most names aren't that newsworthy. I would like to let you hear the names of the 4 people who died. I think that'd be appropriate. Miguel Arellano, 24. William Bailey, 67. Doyle Harrison, 61. And Stanley Politano, 69. So Miguel Arellano, William Bailey, Doyle Harrison, and Stanley Politano all perished as a result of that crash. So while we're discussing how long that man's sentence is and whether or not he could have hit that runaway truck ramp or not, or whether or not his brakes failed or if his truck was too heavy or if he knew what he was doing, let's not lose sight of the fact that there are 4 people who died. So Miguel Arellano, William Bailey, Doyle Harrison, and Stanley Politano are the 4 people. Meanwhile, the district attorney called the governor's action disappointing and premature in a statement issued recently, saying, "I joined the surviving victims and families of those who lost their loved ones in their wish to have the trial judge determine an appropriate sentence in the case because the judge is the one who heard the facts and evidence of what happened. And so we are meeting with the victims and their loved ones this evening to support them in navigating this unprecedented action and to ensure they are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect during this difficult time." So the prosecution simply wanted to have a hearing where they could say, okay, let's assume that 110 is too much. What's appropriate? Let's go over a few facts here and try to determine if that law regarding how these sentences are served, if that law wasn't here, what would he get? And have a hearing. But the prosecution said their office is looking forward to releasing information about the case that they could not reveal while the case was proceeding. So that'll be an interesting turn of events also, possibly. During the trial, prosecutors argued that the truck driver had several chances to prevent the crash. For instance, they say that he knew there was something wrong with his brakes, and he also drove recklessly in the hours before the crash. So the jury convicted the truck driver of 16 different charges, and under Colorado's mandatory minimum sentencing laws, those crimes of violence must be sentenced consecutively, not concurrently. And that's one of those things that if you miss that word, there are famous examples of people who get sentenced, and it'll be 10 years for this, 10 years for this, 10 years for this. Well, that's only 10 years if they're served concurrently. If they're served consecutively, that becomes 30 years. Big difference. And so some state statutes will say these kinds of sentences can be served concurrently, these kinds cannot. And I've had people say, Steve, that makes no sense. Well, I'm not here to tell you that it makes sense. I'm here to tell you what the law is. And as noted here, if enough people are outraged about something, change might happen. I suspect that in the aftermath of this, there are going to be legislators in Colorado saying maybe we need to revisit that issue on how those sentences are served. The sentence prompted calls for a rewriting of Colorado's sentencing laws. And in his letter, the governor also suggested that might be a good thing to address this time. Meanwhile, the governor acknowledged the loss of those killed and the pain suffered by those injured and who lost loved ones and said that the truck driver made bad decisions. He urged the truck driver to seek restorative justice with the victims and their families. And he wrote, "You have wondered why your life was spared when other lives were taken. You will struggle with this burden of this event for the rest of your life, but never forget that because of this event, countless others will struggle with the loss of their loved ones or injuries as well. And you will serve your just sentence." I would say that, if you'd asked me before hearing the news, what would be an appropriate sentence? I think 10 years would have probably been what occurred to me first. And if you said, Steve, what about 20 years? Maybe, I don't know, but 10 to 20, somewhere in there seems about right. Less than 10 would seem to me to be too little. And much more than 20 would seem to be too long. But I also do agree with the people who say, Steve, what about the people out there who are serving these shorter sentences for much crazier crimes? Because we know this guy didn't get behind the wheel that day and say, I want to kill people today. He didn't. And no one, I don't think anyone's saying he did. But that doesn't mean that we look at it and go, oh, it was just an accident. So, I think the 10 years is in the range of what I would have thought was appropriate. However, I would have also liked to see what would have happened at that hearing in January where the judge was going to let both sides make arguments about what would be more appropriate. Because it's one of the reasons that they like to have post-trial hearings held by the judge who oversaw the trial, because the judge oversaw the trial, and the judge will know the facts of the case because the judge was there. But 10 years is what it is now because of the governor's clemency, and so it got reduced from 110 to 10. And I'd like to thank all the people who sent me this letter in the last 12 hours. David, Donna, Brandon, Eric, John, Stephen with a PH, Gary, Frederick, Cassandra, John, Guy, Rafe, Suze, Garrett, and Will. Yes, I have to go to the other page. Mike, Robert, Yevgeny, Viking, Damon, Echo, Arthur, Dan, Howard, Kevin, Scott, Nathan, Edward, Robert, James, and D. Wilburn. D. Wilburn. He used only his first initial, but his last name. And I would remind you, if you send me an email with a story that you want me to cover, if you'd like me to plug you at the end like this, please put a name there. Get someone looking going, it's not even a name here. I know some people don't care. Some people don't care. But it's kind of like when you would call into a radio station when you're 14 years old and ask them to play you a song, and they actually played it. They go, hey, this is going out to Steve in Birmingham. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. So, small joys in life. Once again, in case you missed it, David, Donna, Brandon, Eric, John, Stephen, Gary, Frederick, Cassandra, Rafe, John, Guy, Suze, Garrett, Will. Page 2. Mike, Dan, Howard, Edward, Robert, Kevin, Arthur, Robert, Eugenie, Echo, Scott, James, D. Wilburn, Viking, Damon, and Nathan. Thanks a lot, everyone. Questions or comments, as always, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. As the stamp said to the envelope, stick with me and we'll go places.